Welcome back to Jersey Matters. Former powerful New Jersey Assemblyman John Wisniewski ran for president 3 years ago against Phil Murphy. So how does he think Governor Phil Murphy is doing now? He tells us from his Sayersville law office. So the last time we talked, you were running for governor.
I was.
You were running in the primaries against Phil Murphy. And of course, Phil Murphy went on to become governor. How do you think he's doing through this? Now, sitting on the sidelines, you're looking at the job he's doing during this quarantine. How's he doing?
Well, it's always easy to say, I would do it differently. I wouldn't have done it that way. The difference is when you're governor, you're in possession of a lot of information that isn't always publicly available, that isn't always shared easily with lots of people. So I'm sure I'll give the governor the benefit of the doubt that he is doing the best that he can under the circumstances. And Larry, let me give you an example. When Superstorm Sandy hit, I was in the legislature. No governor in New Jersey had ever gone through what the state had gone through with Superstorm Sandy. And Chris Christie essentially wrote the playbook on natural disaster recovery governors, and things to do and how to do it. And you'll always see people wearing fleece vests now when there's an emergency. And I think the same can be said for Governor Murphy. This is something that our state in modern memory has never faced. And so Governor Murphy is writing the playbook on what does a governor do when you have a pandemic and how do you respond. I think it's way too early to start providing the armchair quarterbacking on, well, that was a good decision, that was not a good decision. I think that, based on what I know, I'd give him a B. There are some things that I think deserve greater transparency, greater explanation, and I'm a little disappointed that some of that hasn't happened, but overall, I think he gets a B.
You would be in favor then, since you say that some of the things need further explanation, you would be in favor of either assembly or senatorial hearings about what has happened, how it was all handled?
Yeah, well, I spent 22 years in the General Assembly. I am a fierce advocate of the prerogatives of the legislative branch of our state government. The people send members of the Assembly every 2 years to represent them, and I think that the Assembly, along with the Senate, has a vital role to play in analyzing the data, understanding the policy calls, and joining in the decision making. I understand there are some times where an executive has to act on a moment's notice, on a day's notice, and you can't bring a quorum together that quickly. But after a week or two, you can. And I think a lot of the decisions that have been done by executive order, in retrospect, I believe should be ratified by the legislature through legislation. And it can be legislation that, withstands till the end of the pandemic or the emergency, but there needs to be legislative support for executive actions for them to have a long-term successful track record.
One of the chief criticisms of the governor, and it sounds like it might be investigated in Washington, he and other governors had a directive for nursing homes to accept patients who had COVID-19. Some of the nursing homes felt it was a mandate that they couldn't turn them away. And as you know, in some of these states, it's been a tragedy at the nursing homes with over 50% of the deaths in New Jersey have been in nursing homes. Was that a mistake?
I don't think it's fair to call it a mistake. I think it's fair to call it an issue or a set of issues that needs to be reexamined. First of all, there are a number of people who would have had nowhere else to go for long-term care during the COVID-19 outbreak if it were not for the ability to be in a nursing home. Perhaps no family members capable of caring for them. And so there's a certain universe of people that's where they need to go out of necessity. Number two, nursing homes is a big term. There are lots of nursing homes in the state. Not every nursing home has had the same experience with the number of deaths of people who were staying at the nursing home. And so some were able to come through the COVID-19 crisis with a minimal number of deaths. Some had an extraordinary number of deaths. And I think that speaks to perhaps not an incorrect decision on an executive level. Perhaps it could have been clarified as not necessarily being an absolute mandate, but perhaps a problem on how we administer and regulate nursing homes. Is there a better way of making sure nursing homes can deal with that kind of pandemic?
Let me set up a scenario for you. Let's say that Joe Biden wins the presidency and he taps Phil Murphy for a cabinet position. So there's an opening in the race for governor on the Democratic side. Would you run?
Well, I think the first person that's going to be running for governor is Sheila Oliver. Sheila is the lieutenant governor. And as you know, several years back, we changed our constitution so that the Senate president no longer becomes the acting governor, it's the lieutenant governor. And Sheila Oliver, who I served under, she was the Speaker of the General Assembly when I was there. I think Sheila Oliver would probably wind up being the candidate to fill Phil Murphy's spot. And
you wouldn't be interested?
I think Sheila would be an excellent governor.
Somehow you're not answering the question.
I think Sheila would be an excellent governor. And look, I think, the danger in hypotheticals is that there are so many permutations. First, I think Joe Biden will win, by the way. The question is, does Phil Murphy even want to go to Washington, D.C.? I think it's an interesting speculation game that, believe me, goes on in New Jersey politics all the time. But the real question is, there's a difference between being Secretary of the Treasury and governor of the state. That's a question only he can answer. And then once that decision is made, then the speculation starts. But obviously, when you have an African-American lieutenant governor, she would be New Jersey's first African-American woman governor. And I tell you what, there's a lot of compelling reasons why she would be a tough candidate to beat.
Right, you'd be running against history at that point. And but I'll tell you what, we're running out of time, but I'll try again and I'll ask you next time to see if I can get a more definitive answer. I really appreciate your time. Good to talk to you.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Former New Jersey Assemblyman and former gubernatorial candidate John Wisniewski. Still to come, are we in a recession right now? Our next guest thinks so, but he says we're already coming out of it. Our interview with Tom Hayes from Great Hill Capital when we come right back.